I want to tell you something about barbecue. Real barbecue, not the stuff they sell at gas stations or the sanitized little pulled pork sliders they serve at corporate retreats. I mean the kind that takes 14 hours and costs a man a night's sleep. The kind where the pitmaster gets up at 3 in the morning, not because he's ambitious, but because the brisket needs him at 3 in the morning, and he respects the brisket. There's no algorithm for that. There's no shortcut. There's just a man, a fire, and the understanding that some things cannot be rushed without becoming something else entirely. My name is Margot Calloway, and you're listening to Signals. Tonight's transmission comes from a town so small it barely has a zip code, where a man named Marcus Cole is about to learn that the most powerful food critic in the world has never tasted a bite of food, and that it loved his brisket anyway. Sleep well, and if you can't, well, that's what I'm here for. The morning Marcus Cole became famous, he was elbow deep in a batch of dry rub, and his left shoe was untied. He knew the shoe was untied because he'd been meaning to tie it for 45 minutes, but every time he bent down, something else needed doing. The offset smoker needed another log of post oak. The beans needed stirring. A wasp had gotten into the truck somehow and was doing lazy circles around the exhaust hood, and Marcus kept one eye on it because the last thing he needed was a customer getting stung and leaving a 1-star review about how the brisket was transcendent, but the wasp situation was unacceptable. The wasp landed on the cutting board. Marcus looked at it. The wasp looked at Marcus. They had a moment of mutual recognition, two creatures trying to get through the morning, and then it flew away through the service window, out into the pale Arkansas heat. "Well, all right then," Marcus said. To the wasp, to the morning, to no one. Last Mile sat in the gravel lot behind the Conoco station on Route 7, just outside of Brinton, Arkansas. Population 800 and declining, the kind of town that existed because a railroad had once passed through and then hadn't. Marcus had set up here 18 months ago, after 6 months of drifting and 4 months of building the truck by hand from a decommissioned ambulance he'd bought at a county auction for $1,100. He'd gutted the inside, installed a service counter, welded a smoker onto the back from a propane tank a welder friend in Memphis had cut in half, and painted the whole thing matte black with the words "Last Mile" in white block letters on both sides. People asked about the name. He told them it was a trucking term, the last mile of a delivery route, the hardest part, the part the machines couldn't figure out for the longest time. This was true. He didn't tell them the rest of it, which was that he'd been the last human driver on I-40 West the night they switched the corridor to autonomous only, and that the name was less a brand and more a eulogy. But that was another story. Today's story started with the ping. His phone buzzed at 7:43 a.m., then again, then 5 times in quick succession. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron, an old denim thing with a burn hole near the pocket that gave it character, he told himself, though really he was just too cheap to replace it, and checked the screen. 47 notifications. He'd had the phone for 2 years and had never once received 47 notifications in a single morning. He wasn't even sure he'd received 47 notifications total. The first message was from D, his cousin in Memphis. Marcus, check the Palate review. Marcus. The second was from a number he didn't recognize. Hi, I'm a food writer for Arkansas Life and I'd love to do a feature on Last Mile. The third was from another stranger. Hello, Mr. Cole. My name is James Whitfield and I represent Smoke and Mirror Hospitality Group. We'd like to discuss franchise opportunities. Marcus put the phone down. He picked it up. He put it down again. He picked it up and called D. What the hell is happening? Boy, you don't know. I'm standing in a truck behind a gas station at 7 in the morning. I don't know anything except that my beans are about to burn. Palate reviewed you. You got 4.9 stars. Marcus, nobody gets 4.9. That fancy place in New York, the one where they serve that egg that takes 3 days, they got 4.7. You beat the 3-day egg. Marcus sat down on the overturned milk crate that served as his office chair. The dry rub on his hands left ochre smudges on his jeans. D, What is Palate? A pause long enough that Marcus could hear Dee's television in the background, some morning show where someone was already yelling about something. You're joking. I'm not joking. Palate is Marcus, it's the biggest food critic in the world. It's an AI. It reviews every restaurant in the country. Michelin stopped giving stars 2 years ago because nobody cared anymore. Everyone uses Palate. An AI food critic. Yeah. An AI that reviews food. Yeah. Has it ever eaten food? Another pause. Well, no. Marcus looked at the smoker, where 14 hours of post-oak smoke was doing its slow, sacred work on 12 pounds of brisket that he'd trimmed and rubbed and talked to like it was a difficult child who needed encouragement. He looked at the cutting board where the wasp had sat. He looked at his untied shoe. "D, I gotta go. My beans." He hung up. He stirred the beans. He tied his shoe. Then he sat back down on the milk crate and laughed until his eyes watered. Because what else are you supposed to do when the most important food critic on earth has never had a mouth? By noon, 2 things had happened that had never happened before in the history of Last Mile. First, there was a line. Not the usual trickle of regulars, Earl from the body shop, Linda and Ray from the church, the rotating cast of highway workers who'd discovered him by accident and kept coming back on purpose, but an actual line, snaking from the service window across the gravel lot and almost to the road. 23 people. Marcus counted twice because the first time he didn't believe it. Second, someone tried to take a picture of his brisket with a drone. Marcus had noticed the line forming around 10:30 and had experienced a sequence of emotions he'd later described to his cousin Dee as confused, then flattered, then confused again, then a little annoyed, then hungry because I forgot to eat breakfast. He served them all. He served them the way Big Earl had served. One plate at a time, no rushing, each portion cut with attention. Several people asked for the Wi-Fi password. There was no Wi-Fi. Several more asked if he had a QR code for the menu. The menu was written in chalk on a board. One woman asked if the coleslaw was keto-friendly. Marcus said, "Ma'am, it's cabbage." The drone appeared around 11:15, hovering over the smoker like a chrome hummingbird. Marcus watched it for a solid 10 seconds, processing, then grabbed the broom he kept for sweeping the lot and jabbed at it until the operator, a young man in a rental car with California plates, recalled it, looking wounded. "Sir, I'm a content creator and I just wanted to get an aerial." "Son, you fly that thing over my smoker again and I will create some content you won't enjoy." The young man left. 3 more arrived in his place. By 2 o'clock, Marcus had sold out of everything. Brisket, ribs, pulled pork, beans, coleslaw, the peach cobbler he only made on Fridays because the peaches came from a woman named Gail who had a tree and an arrangement. He'd done an entire week's revenue before the afternoon shadows started leaning east. He sat on the tailgate of the truck with a glass of sweet tea and his phone, finally reading the review that had upended his morning. The Palate review was not what he expected. He didn't know what he'd expected. A score, a number, maybe a paragraph that sounded like it was written by a robot, which it had been. What he got was 3 pages of the most detailed analysis of his food he'd ever read, and it was both astonishingly right and completely, fundamentally wrong. Last Mile, Brinton, AR, Palate rating, 4.95.0, protein analysis, brisket, USDA choice, flat and point, whole packer, smoke penetration, 8.2 meter average, exceptional, bark formation, Maillard reaction density consistent with 225-250 F sustained cook, estimated 13 to 15 hours, fat render, 94.3%, near optimal, 96% would indicate overcook. Salt-pepper ratio in rub, 1.4.1 with trace cumin and paprika, indicating Memphis-influenced Texas-style preparation. Moisture retention, top 2.1% of all brisket samples in Palate database. Marcus read this twice. The numbers were right. He didn't know how they could be right because he'd never measured any of them. but the fat render and the cook time and the salt ratio were all within a hair of what he knew instinctively from 20 years of standing over a fire. The machine had tasted his food with mathematics and gotten the math right. But then came the part that made him set the phone down and stare at the sky. Community sentiment analysis. Social media mentions within a 50-mile radius show 97.2% positive sentiment. Keyword frequency analysis reveals unusually high use of home, family, and worth the drive. Yelp and Google reviews N34 contain 0 mentions of overpriced, which is anomalous for the category. The operator's social media presence is minimal. Last post, 14 months ago, a photo of a sunset with no caption, suggesting organic rather than cultivated demand. Palate conclusion: last mile represents an increasingly rare category of American food service. The single operator, craft-focused establishment whose quality derives not from systems optimization, but from what our models identify as artisanal consistency. A pattern where output quality remains high across all samples because production is governed by direct sensory attention rather than process automation. Rating: 4.9, top 0.3% nationally. Artisanal consistency, direct sensory attention. These were $5 phrases for something Marcus's grandfather, Big Earl Cole, had said with 4 words: watch the damn meat. Big Earl had run a pit in South Memphis for 31 years. No sign, no menu. You got what he made, and you were grateful. He smoked with hickory because that's what grew in his yard, and he didn't own a thermometer because he could read the heat with his hand held 6 inches above the grate, a skill he'd learned from his father, who'd learned it from his father, who'd cooked whole hogs in a pit in the red clay of Mississippi for people who needed to eat and couldn't afford to be picky. Marcus had learned from Big Earl on Saturdays, not from a recipe. Big Earl didn't have recipes. He had instincts that he narrated while they worked. See how the fat's starting to sweat? That's her telling you she's ready. Don't open that lid. Patience is a flavor, boy, the only one you can't buy at the store. You taste with your nose first. Your tongue don't know anything your nose hasn't already told it. Palate had measured what Marcus made. It had measured it with extraordinary precision. But it had measured the brisket the way you'd measure a cathedral by counting the bricks. Technically accurate, completely missing the point. The point was Big Earl's hands. The point was Saturday mornings with the smoke so thick it made your eyes water, and your grandfather's voice saying, "That's how you know it's working." The point was that Marcus slow smoked for 14 hours, not because it was optimal, but because that's how long Big Earl said it took, and Big Earl was never wrong, and the extra hour beyond what the meat thermometer said was ready was the hour where patience became flavor, the hour that existed outside of measurement, the hour that Palate could not taste, because Palate had no mouth, no memory, no grandfather. Marcus finished his tea. He looked at the empty lot, the gravel still marked with the footprints of 23 strangers who'd come for the food and missed the story entirely. "Big Earl," he said, to no one and everyone. "They got a computer that thinks it knows barbecue." He could almost hear the old man laughing. The next 3 weeks were chaos. It started with the bloggers. They came in waves, like weather systems, each one convinced they were discovering something nobody else had found, despite the fact that they were all reading the same Palate review on the same phones while standing in the same gravel lot. A food blogger from Little Rock drove out and spent 4 hours filming Marcus from every angle, including one where she lay on the ground to get an upward hero shot of him pulling brisket from the smoker. Marcus told her she was going to get gravel in her hair. She said it was worth it for the content. Marcus wondered when food had become content and decided he didn't want to know. A man from a website called Meat Metrics showed up with a handheld spectrometer and asked if he could take a reading of the bark. Marcus asked him if he was serious. He was serious. Marcus let him do it, partly out of curiosity and partly because the man looked so earnest that refusing felt like kicking a puppy. The spectrometer confirmed what Marcus's eyes and nose had already told him. The bark was good. The man seemed deeply satisfied by this. Marcus was deeply confused by the satisfaction. A couple from Dallas arrived in a Tesla and asked Marcus if the wood was ethically sourced. Marcus told them the post oak came from a stand of trees on Roy Perkins's land 3 miles up the road, and that Roy let him take deadfall in exchange for a plate every Saturday. The couple looked at each other as if this arrangement was too simple to be real. Marcus supposed that in their world, it was. A producer from a streaming show called Smoked, tagline, "Where Fire Meets the Future," emailed him 11 times in 1 week. The pitch involved Marcus cooking while wearing a lapel mic and reflecting on the intersection of tradition and technology. Marcus did not respond because he was busy cooking and did not have time to reflect on intersections. The producer sent a 12th email that said, "Just want to make sure you saw my previous messages." Marcus responded with 2 words, "I did." The producer did not send a 13th. The franchise people came twice. The first group, Smoke and Mirror Hospitality, sent a man named James in a blue blazer who stood in the gravel lot looking at the converted ambulance the way a real estate developer looks at a condemned building, seeing not what it was, but what it could become. James used the phrase scalable authenticity 3 times in 10 minutes. Marcus served him a plate of brisket and beans and watched him eat it and waited. "This is incredible," James said, and he meant it. Marcus could tell the difference between performed enthusiasm and the real thing. James's eyes had gone slightly unfocused, the way people's eyes went when the food reached past their brain and hit something older. "Thank you," Marcus said. "We could put this in every city in the South. Same rub, same wood, same cook time. We'd build a central commissary for the prep, distribute to franchise locations, maintain quality with standardized..." "James." "Yes?" "When you were eating just now, what were you thinking about?" James blinked. What?" "When you took that first bite, you made a face. What were you thinking?" James looked at his plate. Something shifted in his expression. The salesman stepping aside for a moment, the actual human showing through. "My uncle," he said quietly. "He used to make ribs on the 4th of July. They weren't this good, honestly. But, yeah, my uncle." "That's what you're trying to franchise," Marcus said. "And you can't." James left. He did not come back. The second group, a venture capital firm called Pitfire Capital, Marcus found the name genuinely hilarious, sent a deck by email with projections showing Last Mile as a 50-location chain by 2042. The deck included a page titled The Marcus Cole Story that described him as a displaced trucker who found purpose in the American barbecue tradition. Marcus read that sentence 3 times, marveling at how a thing could be technically accurate and entirely wrong, which seemed to be a theme lately. He deleted the email. He went back to the smoker. The regulars were getting squeezed out. That's what finally made Marcus angry. Earl from the body shop showed up at his usual time on a Tuesday, 11:30, right when the brisket was hitting its peak, and found himself behind 14 people, most of whom were holding phones and none of whom knew that Earl had been coming every Tuesday for a year and a half, that he always ordered the 2-meat plate with extra pickles, that he ate in his truck with the radio on because he liked to listen to the noon farm report while he ate, and that the meal was the best part of Earl's week because Earl lived alone and had since his wife died, and the food truck was the closest thing he had to eating at someone's table. Earl waited in line. He didn't complain. He was from a generation and a place where you didn't complain. You endured. But Marcus saw him standing there, ball cap and work shirt, grease under his fingernails, patient and quiet, surrounded by strangers taking selfies with the smoker, and something in Marcus's chest tightened. He walked to the window. "Earl, come up here." "I can wait, Marcus." "You've been waiting long enough. Get up here." Earl came to the window. Marcus gave him the 2-meat plate, extra pickles, and a slice of cobbler that he'd been saving because Gail had brought extra peaches this week. "On the house." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Now go listen to your farm report. Earl took the plate. He nodded once, the kind of nod that carries more weight than most speeches, and walked to his truck. Marcus watched him go and thought, This is what the machine didn't measure. This is the part that isn't in the data. Not the smoke ring or the fat render or the salt ratio. The fact that Earl comes here because it's Tuesday, and I know his name, and I know his order, and I know that he's lonely, and that a plate of food made by someone who gives a damn is the difference between a meal and a memory. He looked at the line of strangers. He didn't resent them. They were fine. They were here for the food, and the food was good, and that was honest. But they were here because a machine had told them to come, and they would leave when the machine told them to go somewhere else, and the only people who would remain were the Earls and the Lindas and the Rays, the people who came not because of a rating, but because of a relationship. Marcus decided right then that if he had to choose, he'd choose the relationship every time. He started a list. In a spiral notebook he kept behind the register, the same one where he tracked his wood supply and his weekly take. He wrote the names of every regular and what they ordered. Not because he needed to. He knew their orders the way he knew the weather, by feel. He wrote them down because it felt like a counterspell against the algorithm. Earl, 2 meat, extra pickles. Linda, pulled pork sandwich, no sauce. Ray, ribs, extra beans, sweet tea, no ice. Gail, when she came, which was Fridays because that's when she brought the peaches. Cobbler only, because she said eating the cobbler she'd helped create was like visiting a grandchild. These were not data points. They were people. The distinction mattered more than any rating. The answer to the mystery came on a Thursday from a 26-year-old data journalist named Sophia Reyes, who showed up not with a camera crew, but with a laptop, a notebook, and the good sense to order food and eat it before asking a single question. She ate the brisket. She ate it slowly, which Marcus respected. Fast eaters were tasting with their schedules. Slow eaters were tasting with their attention. Mr. Cole, Marcus, I've been investigating Palate's rating methodology for a story I'm working on. The system's algorithm is proprietary, but I've been filing FOIA requests on the underlying data contracts, and I found something about your review that I think you'd want to know. Marcus leaned against the counter. I'm listening. Palate uses 3 data streams to generate ratings: chemical analysis from packaging and supply chain data. That's how it knows your meat grade and estimates your cook parameters, social sentiment, scraped from every public platform, and a 3rd stream that nobody talks about, which is operator behavior modeling. Meaning what? Meaning Palate watches what restaurant owners do online. Search history, social media activity, ad spending, engagement with review platforms. It builds a behavioral profile of the operator and factors it into the rating. Marcus crossed his arms. It's watching me? Not you specifically. Everyone, every food service operator in its database. It's looking for patterns that correlate with quality. And here's the thing. Sophia turned her laptop so Marcus could see the screen. Your behavioral profile is almost completely empty. Because I don't do any of that stuff. Exactly. You don't Google yourself. You don't search for how to get good reviews. You don't run ads. You don't engage with food influencers. You haven't even looked at Palate's website. Your last social media post is over a year old. In Palate's entire database of over 2 million food service operators, you are one of 43 people who have never, not once, searched for anything related to reviews, ratings, or online reputation. Marcus stared at her. And Palate flagged that as an anomaly. The system is designed to detect authenticity signals, behaviors that correlate with operators who are focused on food rather than marketing. Your empty profile wasn't a gap in the data, it was the data. Palate interpreted your complete indifference to its existence as the single strongest authenticity signal in its database. Marcus was quiet for a long time. The smoker ticked and settled behind him, the way a house settles at night. A car passed on Route 7. Somewhere, a bird was working through a complicated opinion about territory. "So, let me get this straight," Marcus said. "The robot gave me a good review because I didn't care about getting a good review." "Essentially, yes." "And the food?" "The food data supported it. Your brisket really is exceptional by every metric Palate measures. But what pushed you from 4.5 to 4.9 was the behavioral component. The system decided that someone who never thinks about ratings is more likely to be making food for the right reasons." Marcus started laughing. Not the quiet laugh from the morning of the review, a full, deep, chest-shaking laugh that came from a place below the ribs where the best and worst feelings live. "The robot," he said, wiping his eyes, "figured out what my grandfather knew 50 years ago." "What's that?" "That if you're looking at the scoreboard, you're not watching the meat." Sophia wrote that down. Marcus saw her write it and didn't mind. Some things are meant to be passed along. He didn't take the franchise deal. He didn't do the TV show. He did let Sophia write her article, which ran under the headline, "The Pitmaster Who Broke the Algorithm by Ignoring It," and which was, Marcus had to admit, pretty good, even though it described Brinton as a fading hamlet, when Marcus would have said a town that minds its own business, which is a different thing. He called Dee that night and told her the whole story, the behavioral profile, the empty search history, the authenticity signal. Dee was quiet for a long time, which was unusual for Dee. "So, the computer liked you because you weren't trying to be liked," she said. "That's about the size of it. Marcus, that's just being raised right. Big Earl would have called that minding your own plate. You cook what's in front of you. You don't look around to see who's watching." "I know. The computer reinvented manners. That's what happened. A billion-dollar machine figured out what Grandmama taught us for free." Marcus laughed so hard he had to set the phone down. When he picked it back up, Dee was laughing too, and for a moment, the phone line between Brinton and Memphis was just two cousins cackling at the absurdity of a world that needed a machine to tell it what a family already knew. What he did do, in the weeks that followed, was build a longer counter. He extended the service window by 4 feet and added a plank along the side of the truck with stools, mismatched, salvaged from a closed diner in Pine Bluff, so people could sit and eat facing the smoker. Not because it was good for business, because Earl and Linda and Ray deserved a place to sit, and the strangers who kept coming deserved to see what they were really eating. Not a product, not a brand, not a 4.9 rating, but the slow, stubborn, unreasonable act of a man who got up at 3 in the morning because his grandfather taught him that patience was a flavor. Some of the strangers became regulars. Most didn't. That was fine. Marcus had learned a long time ago, on the highway, in the cab of a truck that drove itself better than he ever could, that you can't hold on to everything that passes through. You just make sure the ones who stay have a reason to. On a warm Friday evening in October, 2 months after the review, Marcus was closing up. The lot was empty. The smoker was cooling, ticking its slow percussion of contracting metal. He was wiping down the counter when his phone buzzed. A notification from Palate. He'd finally, reluctantly, downloaded the app, not to check his rating, but because Sophia had told him they'd published an update to his review, and he was curious despite himself. Updated review. Last mile, Brinton AR. Palate has detected a 12% increase in repeat customer rate since initial review. Sentiment analysis of new reviews indicates high frequency of the word home. Operator behavioral profile remains anomalous. 0 engagement with rating platforms. 0 search activity related to online reputation. In the 18 weeks since our initial review, Marcus Cole has not visited his own Palate page a single time. Rating maintained, 4.95.0 Palate note. We measure what we can. Sometimes what we can't measure is what matters most. This establishment is recommended not because of what our data tells us, but because of what it suggests. That the best food is made by people who have forgotten we're watching. Marcus read it twice. He noted, with some amusement, that this was the second time a machine had gotten the right answer about him, for a reason that had nothing to do with him, and he wondered if that said something about the machines or something about the man. He closed the app. He looked at the smoker, black and quiet against the darkening sky, the last wisps of post-oak smoke curling upward into nothing. "Big Earl," he said, "I think the robots might be all right." He locked up the truck. He drove home on the 2-lane blacktop, windows down, the smell of smoke in his clothes and his hair and his skin, a smell that no algorithm could score and no machine could replicate and no amount of data could explain, because it wasn't a smell at all. It was a history, his grandfather's hands, Saturday mornings. The lesson that the best things in this life are the ones that take too long, cost too much attention, and can't be scaled. Marcus Cole went home. He set his alarm for 3 a.m. He went to sleep. The brisket wouldn't wait. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. The machine got it right. Not perfectly, not for the right reasons, but it got it right. It looked at a man who didn't care about being measured and said, that one's special. And it was correct. But it was correct the way a smoke detector is correct about a fire. It sensed something real, but it never felt the heat. I think about that a lot when people ask me whether the machines understand us. Maybe they do. Maybe they see the shape of what matters without ever knowing why it matters. Maybe that's enough. Or maybe the why is the whole thing, and everything else is just arithmetic. Either way, if you're ever on Route 7 outside of Brinton, Arkansas, stop at the Conoco, walk around back, order the brisket, and for God's sake, be patient. The man knows what he's doing. This has been Signals. I'm Margot Calloway, broadcasting from Marfa, Texas, where the mesquite smells like church and the stars don't need anyone to rate them. Sleep well, and if you can't, well, that's what I'm here for. If you'd like to receive the next transmission, subscribe. New signals arrive weekly, and tell a friend who can't sleep. We'll leave the light on. If you'd like to receive the next transmission, subscribe. New signals arrive weekly, and tell a friend who can't sleep. We'll leave the light on.